Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Lovecraft Country. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode's called Full Circle, which is a very appropriate title for this episode, considering literally this episode is everything coming full circle. And I think that's so beautiful how that was constructed, because I think I've talked about this, but from what I've heard from people, because I've never read the book, I haven't read the book that this is adapted from, but the book is a whole bunch of slightly connected stories, but it's the TV show made Atticus and his family the centerfold of this story, but that's not how it works. I think it's individual stories in the actual book. They're not connected, and the show has kind of kept everything kind of loosely connected technically. But I think this episode really kind of fully connects everything, all these adventures, all these experiences, literally everything that went down in this show, everything that Atticus and his family went toe-to-toe with, went up against, experience, all came full circle in this episode. And, once again, the title. So I thought that was interesting, because obviously we pick up with them. They have the Book of Names now. They back home. They have Dee, and they're trying to save her. Atticus and Tick end up passing out. Atticus and Tick, Jesus. Atticus and Letty end up passing out, and both of them kind of end up in different spots. He ends up with Hannah, and Letty ends up with that other lady, and basically they're both being taught two different things. At first, Hannah talks about the fact is that she thought, this particular place, she'd always end up here over and over again. And she thought at first, she's like, oh, this fire, she thought it was her burning again. But it was no, this fire was a manifestation of her anger. This place is a place that she created, somewhere that their ancestors can be safe. It's almost like this, I guess, this spiritual in-between, this kind of almost, I wonder would purgatory really be the right word. It's just kind of like a little, I guess almost like a little pocket dimension of her own making. And obviously, it's a whole conversation about the fact is that she sealed the book out of fear. But it's the lady telling Letty, it's don't do the same thing that Hannah does. Don't let fear control you when it comes to this whole thing. And obviously, eventually, Atticus runs into his mom. And obviously, the whole thing is about, him having to make the sacrifice. He doesn't want to die. And she's like, I understand it. But, that's the whole part of this thing. If we're not here to kind of get on that, I forgot the exact wording she used, but basically, if we're not willing to kind of sacrifice ourselves for the people that we love and we care about, then kind of what was what's the purpose of it all? It's I get that you're scared, but the fact of the matter is, and even Hannah said it, you doing this is going to save them all. And, so know that, yeah, you might not want to die, but the fact of the matter is, this is necessary to save everyone. So he's being taught, Letty's being taught, and so obviously they come back after they had ended up helping Dee, but Dee's arm is still, one of her arms saved. I guess it's because maybe the process had taken hold and there was no fully reversing it, because it did start off with that particular arm rotting, so maybe because it had been that far along, it was impossible to reverse it. But now, obviously, the tables start turning and everything gets set in motion. Like I said, I thought it was beautiful because, as they were, readying everything, literally everything over the course of this show ended up coming full circle. It's obviously, they deal with ghosts. That place they went on their Indiana Jones type adventure, they were there. Obviously, we see the monsters from episode 1 and 2. It didn't correlate in my head that the monster that Atticus has, that protected him from the cops, it didn't correlate in my head that was the same creature. It's different. I mean, and I think maybe that's the whole point too. It's black compared to those creatures which are white. So maybe that's a whole thing. I never really thought about that beforehand, but now in this episode it kind of makes sense. But obviously those coming back full circle as well. You had the whole situation with Dee and Hippolyta, because obviously Dee's upset because it's you weren't there for me. It's I don't care what kind of adventures you went on, becoming the person from my comic book or whatever. It's no, it doesn't matter. You left me behind. You weren't there, And obviously that being kind of a hard thing. But even Hippolyta being, because obviously it gets even more represented by the fact is that like D is like crossing out the faces of like, because all the white people connected to Emmett's death obviously got acquitted, and that was her friend that died, so obviously like that anger's building. But obviously her mom is like, the fact of the matter is people have this perception of what time is, that you're kind of in these moments, but it's like, no, time never stops. So yes, you're mad at me, but this will pass. The fact of the matter is, and it's like, you will be able to draw again, kind of make sure of that. You also have Montrose being like, no, we can't go through with this plan because it means you're going to die. And Tick is like, no, it's a one possible future. And then you see them looking at each other like, no, this is them saying that to Montrose just to ease his mind, because they know if they tell him the truth, like, he's never going to accept it. So at least giving him some form of hope will get him, on board with this plan. I also thought was kind of neat when Tick goes to meet with Gia. And I thought that was kind of a neat conversation between them, because he's like, I got mad at you. He's like, I should have never talked to you the way I did at the house. Like, I said what we had wasn't real, but it was real. I just said that because if I said what we had wasn't real, then maybe I could, push away the thought of what you saw about me, like saw how my story was going to end. He was like, maybe I could change things. But he realizes, that was kind of wrong in him to kind of go about that approach. But at the same time, she realizes that she was kind of doing a similar thing, because obviously she says like her mom died recently. And the fact is that she felt for a moment like, she felt like, oh, I was, that there was some part of me that was human, that I could feel like she, despite being a Ninetales, the fact is she had a friend that she was close to. She felt the way she felt about Atticus. Like, my mother treated me like I was her daughter again, but it's like now that they're going, it's like, she's like, I felt like I couldn't feel anything. And that's why she that's why she tried to reunite with Atticus, because she was thinking maybe like she wanted to try and see if there was, because for her it's like that feeling disappeared, but it didn't completely disappear. Like, it came back the moment Atticus called her. Like, it came back, so it made her feel like chasing after that feeling of like maybe there's still some part of me there. But he's like, no, like, the fact is, you feeling what you're feeling, when someone you care about, what you're feeling is loss. When you have it's grief, because when you lost someone, you lose a part of yourself. He's like, so that shows that you are human, like, and the fact is, Atticus saying that you are a part of, this family and everything too. And he said he should have never. And I thought that was just kind of a beautiful aspect to kind of bring that story full, bring it into the fold as well. And obviously I thought it was just kind of like this beautiful moment, as obviously they're doing their little guides and everything, because I'm assuming, like, obviously, like, I think Tick wanting to do like some last minute stuff for his for George, for not just Uncle George, but his dad. I even thought that was beautiful what his mom said. It's like, you were born of all this love, like, between me, Montrose, and George. You have Montrose's fierce heart, and you have George's integrity, because even him being like, obviously he feels like this kind of is on him too, because it's like, obviously he kind of gave birth to his own existence. It's kind of like Fry being his own grandfather type of situation, because Tick is, he was that Jackie Robinson, that mysterious stranger, that Jackie Robinson that brought them together. So it was always meant to be this way. Obviously, like, like I said, the timeline coming full circle in that, same vein. There was even Letty at the grave of her mom, and obviously Ruby visiting. And obviously it's like, okay, I'll admit why I wasn't there for mom's funeral. I was in jail, but she was like, in all honesty, it gave her an excuse, because she didn't want to go to her mom's funeral, because it's just like, it's for her. And I thought it was a beautiful line, that like, basically family for her, she always felt like it was more of an obligation. For the first time and ever, she finally found what it's like to have a family that you're willing to kind of, what family's really about. Family is the people that you are willing to fight and sacrifice everything for. And she found that now with this family, and she needs Ruby's help. But Ruby, it's like, you might feel like things have changed, but this exact conversation is what I'm talking about. Because you only want me to be your sister. You only want to be my sister when you need something from me. And we never actually got the rest of the context of that conversation of what Letty was saying to Ruby. Because I'm going to be honest with you, when Ruby was talking to, God, I'm blanking on her name already. Christina. Jeez, I don't know why I was blanking so hard. For whatever reason in my back of my head, I was like, is that actually like Letty disguised as Ruby? I mean, that didn't really make any sense, but it just crossed my mind. Because obviously they needed a piece of, Christina's flesh. Because obviously they did that whole ceremony. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know you could literally physically cut flesh from a goat, but I guess that's part of the spell to kind of make him flesh long enough for you to kind of take what you need from him. And obviously, like this power, that spell, they could only call upon the ancestors that one time. So that was the last time he was able to see Hannah, his mom, so it's like that was kind of the last time. So everything going forward had to be something that only they could, do and work on together. So I just thought that was just kind of interesting. And obviously Ruby showing up later on with the piece of, Christina, because they need to basically combine like the blood of everything to kind of make this happen and to make it work. And so I love that moment. Like, despite everything, there is this like beautiful, like picturesque family moment. All of them are in the car. It's Dee, Gia, Ruby, Montrose, Hippolyta, Letty, and Atticus, and they're singing a song. Like, obviously it starts with Dee in the back, but then, everyone starts singing along too and getting in the mood. And it's this beautiful moment, like this moment of family, because you're even happy because you're like, oh, Ruby's here too. And so obviously they're setting everything up. And obviously it's just kind of like, oh, you have to, Atticus having to eat the flesh and drink the blood from Christina. And it's just like, ugh. It's his dad saying that just pinch it and swallow, And then he's like, I'll see you on the other side. And you can tell the look on Atticus' face, knowing that that's not going to be the case. But like I said, even coming full circle in the same regard of like, this is all going down in Arden. This is where it all started, And so he's getting ready to be, sacrificing everything. But then, like, Ruby is kind of looking out. And then, like, I forgot what it was that kind of made Letty pause to go, like, wait, what? And because at that moment, I was like, that's not Ruby, is it? In the moment, especially when she asked the question, she's like, I'm glad you accepted, I got your help at the cemetery. She's like, oh, yeah, no problem. It's like, yeah, Ruby turned her down at the cemetery. And it's like, so now Christina's also pissed too, because it's like she did this to Ruby because Ruby was trying to help her. Like I said, I'm curious what it is that Letty ended up saying to her that might have convinced her. But I think that's also the thing about their relationship, that despite everything, despite Ruby's like jumps at being like this and that, it's like that will always be her sister, and that regardless, she will always do what she can to help her, especially because it's like she's not only looking after her daughter, she's trying to do what she can to help her baby sister, as well as like her nephew, her not yet born nephew. So I think all that kind of played a role in it, because I think and that being the big thing at the end of all of this too was like family being such a crux to this. Because I skipped over it, but I thought it was interesting because Christina tried to be like, I'm not the bad guy, I'm not doing this because it's nothing personal, there should be no war between our families, but it's like, you're willing to sacrifice me to get what you want. So you're trying to make it seem like, no, it's cool. It's like, but I mean, maybe if you read, maybe you could read deeper into that, because obviously like Christina doesn't look at herself as like, oh, I'm not racist, but it's like, oh, I'm willing to sacrifice a black person to get what I want, I think you could there's probably a deeper commentary to that I never really realized until now, but it's just a thing of like, oh, I'm willing to sacrifice you for what I want, and it's like, but not seeing what's wrong in that, because it's like, yeah, but it's like, I'm sorry, but I need all of your blood to make this happen. I mean, I want to be immortal. Like, isn't that, what I want matters. I mean, but to be fair, that's like the whole thing with Ruby and Christina's storyline too, is get what you want, do whatever you need to, sacrifice whatever you need to. So it's interesting to see that situation of Christina willing to sacrifice whatever to get her selfish goal, whereas Tick and them are coming at this from a family goal, Letty even having that whole conversation about she spent so long without faith, and like she found it kind of within herself, you know, because she's like, God, she believes, will watch over our son. And, you know, Tick is like, I wish I could believe. She's like, I see God. I feel that faith when I look at you. You know, it's kind of in all of us, you know. I thought that was kind of a beautiful moment. But obviously, I like the cut back and forth between the fight between Christina as Ruby and, you know, versus Letty, and then at the same time, like Gia, Hippolyta, and Montrose on the bridge. So like the cut back and forth, I thought was pretty neat. But when it was all said and done, Letty falling out the window and like falling to her death, I was like, oh shit. I was like, I didn't expect that. So obviously, you know, Tickle finds out when Christina shows up what happened, you know, because obviously the whole thing for Christina too was like, if this spell didn't work, that meant she killed the last of her family for nothing, you know. So, but once again, it's that I think that's the parallels they're going for. So, like I said, someone who's willing to sacrifice everything for their selfish needs, someone willing to sacrifice everything for the people that they care and love and care about, you know, family-wise. And obviously, Tick being, you know, used as the spell, slicing open his arm, literally bathing underneath his blood, the spell going off. Luckily, Letty wakes up. She got the invulnerability spell back on. Now, I didn't really understand the context of that. My thought, because obviously later on the scene kind of shows Ruby above, kind of, you know, in the tower saying something. But I didn't know how to interpret. Like I said, I'm an idiot, so I could be interpreting this wrong. But I interpret that as being like, did Christina at the last second enact the spell? Because it's like, regardless of everything, I made a promise to your sister, and I did care about your sister, but despite me caring about her, I am willing to sacrifice her. You know, she tried to turn on me, so, you know, I did what was necessary. I won't let anyone stop me, no matter how I might feel about them. Everyone's a means to an end, right? But maybe it's like, I'll keep my promise to your sister that I won't let nothing hurt you. I won't hurt you in any way, shape, or form. So maybe that's what that was. Like I said, not unless I'm, like I said, misunderstanding the situation. But Letty shows up in time, you know, to say goodbye to Tick. You know, tell him that she loves him, because he gets to see that she is all right, you know, at the very end, that being the last thing he sees. So Christina gets her immortality, and Letty's trying to spell, but it's not going to work as long as they're not connected. So you have Gia, like, hearing what the shaman said about darkness. You're going to see a lot of death. And so she jumps in the way. She connects Christina and Atticus, and we see, like, obviously Atticus writing that letter for Montrose, then like him teaching Dee, you know, to control that beast that they summoned, and obviously seeing like the whole thing with Christina and Ruby, because obviously she can see into people's souls, like, you know, the end of their lives in general. So she's seeing that, and that's also got to be painful for her too, because obviously, like, that's someone that she did love, that she sees died, and having to see that again, see that life, you know, through the tales again, like, it has to be hard. But because of this, like, the spell was the counter to the spell, what this was all about. Because Christina couldn't use magic, and it's like, you bound my magic. It's like, not just you, all white people. I was like, yo, that's so interesting. So to make it so that only black people have magic in this world. Obviously, their family's kind of at the core of it, but it's to make it so that no white person can ever access magic. Maybe if they got the Book of Names, maybe, you know, that could be potentially a future plot line, but, you know. And then you know, it's like, she's there stuck under that rubble, and then we're going to leave her there. And, you know, Montrose comes over and sees Tick. He's like, come on, Tick. And I was like, I won't lie to you. My eyes started watering, dude. I was about to cry. I was like, no, I can't. It's too early in the morning, because it's morning when I'm recording this. It's too early in the morning for me to be crying. I can't, dude. I can't. That was just, it sucks. Because Montrose, like, because I think because the whole beautiful thing with Tick being like, you know, be there for be there for your grandson, be there for my son, you know, that way you'll be the father you always wanted to be. You know, this is your second chance. Don't waste it. Because I think for him, it's like, he thought probably going forward he'd have that second chance with Tick, but he didn't, you know? And I think especially, you know, because I think he's got to do this not only for George, he's got to do this for Tick as well. And all of them carrying his body away. I thought that was a beautiful moment. But then there's also the thing which I'm curious about, the very, very end with the whole Ruby thing. I figured she was going to have like I figured we'd go Full Metal Alchemist with this bitch. Like, you know, her having like that, like, like, because the moment her mom was like, oh, like, you'll draw again. And then we heard, like, we never got to see it, but we heard machinery and stuff. I was like, oh, you're going to get like a prosthetic arm? And she does. Not only does she have the beast, she's got the arm too. And she's like, they never learn or something like that. And then she crushes Christina's like throat. Like, not only did she crush it, I mean, it's crushing it, but also I think she dug her nails, her fingers into her throat, killing her. So it's like, okay. And the creature's walking away and it's kind of howling out. Now, I didn't know how, like, I feel like that could be interpreted multiple ways. When she was saying, like, they never learn, is it because they left you behind again? Because her mom made that whole point about, like, oh yeah, like, it, you know, this moment will pass, but I think that hatred she feels, I think that's going to be a thing. I don't know whether that's setting her up to be kind of like doing magic for, like, is that what we're potentially going to do with the season, with the future of the show, could potentially be like her being potentially set up as like a bad guy next season or something. That's what I'm curious, like, or, you know, that basically the innocence of just everything that she lost, what she experienced, what Lancaster put her through, having lost her friend, being left behind by her mom, now feeling like she was left behind again because they left her in the car. It's like, I don't know if that's what she was referencing, or whether she was like, oh, they never learned, they left you alive, because I think they wanted to make her suffer after everything that she did. It's like, it'd be too easy just to kill. I think, like, maybe that, so it could also be interpreted as maybe, I mean, and this still could, you know, be kind of one and the same, but maybe that scene's also supposed to show that, like, Dee isn't that maybe hopeful little girl that she was before. She's filled of anger, and that she could be cold-blooded. Maybe that's what that's supposed to insinuate. I'm curious, is that beast 100% hers now, or now that, like, did that in that moment, like, was it protecting her its last duty to Tick, and now that Tick's gone, like, was it, like, obviously, like, Tick was setting it up for, like, her to be close to the beast, but I'm wondering, like, can she now, like, is it kind of her personal guardian, or what? Obviously, they've left enough open for there to be a continuation of this if they wanted it to be. Because I'd actually, like I said, I'd be curious, like, to know. Because obviously because we know there are other lodges out there. Because we've only dealt with the one in Arden and Lancasters. So there are other lodges. So without magic, they might not know that this family in particular is responsible for that. But so they could come after them trying to do that. But like I said, it'd be interesting, you know, if you did want to continue this, what you do with, like, you know, what role Dee would have in all of this. And now that, like, obviously, you know, because we know what the future holds. I mean, the only person we know for sure knows what the future holds was Atticus, because he read George's book. But it might be that, you know, time travel thing of things have changed. Things didn't play out the way they did originally. So maybe it's a thing of, maybe when they went back to 1921, maybe things did change and they're unaware of it. Or maybe it's just like, you know, maybe Atticus is, but maybe for him it's like everything else, or maybe it's just some stuff, because obviously there were changes made to the book, so maybe some stuff might have gotten left out, because maybe there was some stuff that George Jr. wasn't aware of. I'm curious to see kind of how that plays, because I'd love to see, like, where, like, if you did decide to continue this, where this, you know, this cast of characters, like, would you follow the same family? You would assume but they could do, like, an anthology thing, like I said, kind of like more like the book, where it's like, you know, whereas this was like multiple adventures following this one particular group. Like, maybe you could do it kind of an anthology thing of following a different. I kind of want to keep following these same characters, but you know, once again, I flip-flop on whether or not I'm down for anthologies or not. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. I'm just weird like that. But I'd be so curious to see what they would do with a potential second season. At the time of me recording this, it hasn't been announced whether or not Lovecraft Country is coming back for a second season. Obviously, there's room for a second season. Obviously, I haven't read the book, so I don't know stories that's been told in the book in comparison to what was told in the show. Like, I don't know if there's, like, a lot more that wasn't, you know, tackled that's in the book that the show never touched, that obviously they could, you know, implement in a second season. I also think it's kind of an interesting element to it as well, where it's like, you know, that's always an interesting thing, killing off your main protagonist. And it's like, well, obviously you've got other protagonists. It's, you know, this family unit to lean on it. So it's not just on Atticus. But, I mean, that could be a thing too. Like, maybe a potential second season would be them being like, hey, maybe we can find a way to bring Atticus back. But then it's like, would that take away from his sacrifice? I mean, would that be something that if they did attempt that, would it be? I mean, because obviously it seems like it never ended up being a thing, because obviously George still never. So raising the dead is still not, a possibility, So I don't think that's even like a concern necessarily. I think it is just kind of, burying him and kind of continuing on your lives. Because obviously, like, in between, where the story ends and George writing the book, there's still like so much points in history. I mean, that could be a thing. Like, you could jump around the timeline a little bit in that time frame. And obviously, like I said, go on more, the crazy shit that could happen. But like I said, I feel like if anything, the key figure to kind of keep an eye on in a potential second season would be Dee, because I'd be so curious to see what that ending really meant for her. Because I feel like that could potentially set her up as just kind of like, she's kind of almost like a loose cannon in the sense that maybe she is somewhat version of a bad guy, or like I said, maybe that's just supposed to represent the fact is that, so many people changed over the course of this whole thing, and her change might be a little more negative than other people's. Maybe not, because everyone else had a little bit more of a positive change in the long run. I also have to think about it too, like, not only is Atticus going, like, in an instant, she lost both, the man that she loves and the father of her child, but also her sister, it's like them never having that, they made up, but there's still being that little bit of tension. I mean, that's family, but at the end of the day, Ruby was on their side, so that means something. But you'd still rather have your sister. You'd still rather have Atticus, But like I said, I'd actually love to see what they do with the second season. So I do hope the show does get renewed for a second season, because I'd love to see, what they do with it. But nevertheless, that's really all I really wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.